So thank you everyone for joining us today for our 7th session of CEC 15's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series. I am Camille Casaretti, the president of Brooklyn District 15's Community Education Council. I'm sorry, my computer is like moving around here again. So sorry. Okay, so today is our 7th session of 8 info sessions, and we are running this series to allow school community members and incoming families to learn about efforts to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in our elementary, middle, and high schools. So as I said, today is our 7th session. We have one more coming up, which is scheduled for Monday, December 14th at 1 p.m. Please share that information with your school community members and invite them to attend. You can find the videos of previous sessions on our CEC d15.org website under the DEI tab. Saida, would you mind dropping that in the chat when you get a chance? And so with the leadership of Superintendent Scott, our District 15 superintendent, we continue to examine our school communities and do what we can to support and promote inclusive practices. Our goal is to have schools for all learners, where everyone is welcome and everyone can contribute to the community. In earlier sessions, we learned about how many of our school practices support equity, inclusion, and diversity. And today we're going to talk about what we can do as individuals, school communities, and as a district to continue in this path to making our schools accessible and available for every child every day. We want to support and nurture all areas of our children's development and learning from social, emotional, and cognitive skills to literacy, math, and science. Understanding that this whole child model is what all students need and require to be successful in the classroom and in life. So how do we get there from here? And you're entering your child into the New York City school system, you probably have some expectations. You might be seeking a particular type of program like dual language or gifted and talented. You might require special services for your child like speech assistance, occupational or physical therapy, or you might have recently arrived from another country and your child does not speak English and you're looking for a transitional bilingual model. You might have an attachment to a school, perhaps because your mother attended that school. Parents and caregivers are coming to the DOE with a variety of needs and expectations, and the DOE is positioned to fulfill those needs. Typically, schools are designed to meet the needs of students within their zone, but sometimes a child will have to leave the zone and possibly the district to find the service they require. This puts the family at a terrible disadvantage, forcing the child to travel greater distances, compromising the family's level of engagement at the school, and limiting their participation in school community events due to travel time and cost of travel. Choosing to leave your neighborhood or district can be a difficult choice for families with young children, with some traveling over an hour each way on a school bus. When people find themselves in these difficult situations, it's hard to see outside of solving the immediate problem. The decisions that people make individually actually have a large impact on others. One of the things that I love about District 15 is that leaders in our community are always focused on what's good for all students. They understand that the choices that people often make out of individual needs or wants are likely good choices for all children. For example, implementing a phonics reading curriculum that would improve outcomes for students with dyslexia would also improve outcomes for children without dyslexia. Similarly, a school-wide enrichment model would allow all students to discover and develop their gifts and talents rather than limiting the G&T class to a small group within the school. Making system-wide changes that consider the needs of all students can create positive ripple effects in school communities and beyond. We've already seen the immediate positive impact that recently added culturally responsive curriculum has had in our classrooms. I'm looking at the world through a social justice lens with attention given to the whole child. Respecting all voices is a move in the direction toward a more equitable and understanding future for all of our children. You can assess your own school's curriculum in partnership with your principal and school leadership team with the culturally responsive curriculum scorecard that was created by the NYU Metro Center that does research on equity and transformation of schools. I will drop that in the chat for you. Okay. So as many of you know, District 15 has recently adopted a new method for middle school admissions that removed all academic, behavioral, and attendance screens. Many families can now rank schools in their preferred order and be offered a seat through a random lottery that includes priority seating for students in temporary housing, English language learners, and students living in low-income situations. The former tracking that had been occurring at the elementary school level and then into middle school has created segregated schools that were causing much concern and may have been considered a civil rights violation. Leaders in District 15 wanted to intervene, making changes that were customized for our community. Now, 3 years into the D15 diversity plan, we can see that the visible changes in our middle school populations. Just want to share this very short video with everybody. I'll drop the link in the chat if you want to look at it again later on. But Saida, if you would, just please share that video.
The District 15 Diversity Plan is a community engagement and planning process that has been established to create diverse, meaningfully integrated schools in District 15. A study by UCLA in 2014 identified New York City as home to the largest and one of the most segregated public school systems in the nation. A white student attends a predominantly white school, and a student of color attends a predominantly minority school. These issues remain 64 years after Brown versus Board of Education, the landmark civil rights case that determined separate but equal publicly funded institutions to be unconstitutional. District 15 in Brooklyn, New York spans from Cobble Hill in the north to Borough Park in the south, Park Slope to the east, and Sunset Park to the west. It is home to 11 middle schools that any eligible District 15 student can apply to. Almost all middle schools use screens. District 15 is economically diverse, with family income starting at $9,829 annually per census tract in the southern part of the district and reaching beyond $200,000 to the northeast. This map symbolizes student residence by race and closely reflects patterns of housing segregation. Segregation can also be observed within the 11 middle schools of District 15. Here we can see a noted representation of white students present in certain middle schools. Conversely, we can observe the underrepresentation of Hispanic students at those same schools. We observed clear patterns between sending elementary to middle schools by race. The white subdistrict is largely in the northeast. Hispanic in the south. Black in the north. And Asian in the southwest. As you can see, each racial subdistrict largely avoids the others. We observed clear differences in the distances students travel to get to school, with Black students traveling 60% further than their white counterparts, and often reporting racial profiling and truancy citations on their journeys. District 15 has highly sought after middle schools that students travel to from all corners of New York City. Here, you'll be able to see where students are coming from and traveling to each middle school by racial groups. However, this analysis is a small portion of the journey that brought us to the District 15 Diversity Plan. These images depict the District 15 community willingness to engage in sometimes difficult but enlightening conversations around race, academic and socioeconomic diversity, the needs of students with disabilities, equitable access to information, and school infrastructure. These conversations took place over more than 110 meetings, 4 community workshops, and 12 working group sessions, becoming the blueprint that guided the District 15 Diversity Plan. The plan's recommendations fall into 2 mutually dependent categories. The inclusion recommendations address school environment and are aimed at supporting diverse school communities and inclusive classrooms, while introducing restorative justice and fostering intra-district collaboration and community engagement. The integration recommendations address how students are selecting and being accepted into middle schools, how families are being provided with information during the middle school application process, and aim to remove the barriers to a quality education while keeping students and family choice. For the full set of recommendations, plan details, and additional information, please visit www.d15diversityplan.com.
Thanks, Ida. If you could drop that, the D15 diversity plan link in the chat, that would be great too. So we are very fortunate today to have Principal Nicole Lancellato joining us to share her story about the Borum Hill School for International Studies and how it's grown over the years. D15 champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, Nicole has been a leader in our district preparing students to become multilingual learners, to impact the world, to promote unity and peace. Nicole's story tells about the importance of collaboration and a shared vision and why we must include all voices to achieve our goals. Nicole, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that generous introduction, Camille. I appreciate it. Thanks for including me, inviting me to participate in this conversation. It's good to be here on this Monday, this dreary Monday. Definitely was something that I was looking forward to. So thanks for being here, everyone. And some of my families from BHS are here. So shout out to Nick and Kim for showing up and engaging in this work with us as our partners. Couldn't do it without you. So I'm going to talk a little bit, and there is a crying baby in the background. So he's with his other mother. He's fine. Everything's fine. But he's 4 months, and that's what babies do. They cry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our journey. I've been at BHS for 16 years. Saying that, it's like, whoa, 16 years. I've been walking into that building on Baltic Street every day for 16 years. I was a special education teacher for 9 years, assistant principal for 3, and I am currently in my 4th year as principal. So I have deep roots in the community, and, you know, in some ways I've grown up in the community, and, you know, it's definitely BHS is in my heart and my second family. And so I care deeply about the success of our students, the success of our school, the success of our district. And it's a big part of my life. And some of the things that I really want to talk about is the journey. And I was talking to Camille a few days ago and kind of reflecting on, you know, some of the things I wanted to highlight. And I started to think about when we became a French dual language school. And we became a French dual language school about 6 years ago. And we also became an authorized international baccalaureate school. So we became an IB school, a French dual language school, For so many years, we, served primarily students of color from Red Hook, from Gowanus. We were a school that struggled with low enrollment. Though, like any community, there were great things always happening, and the school served students, and students. It was a big part of the community for many, many years. And many of you, if you listen to Nice White Parents, we all got to learn more about the history from that podcast. So the building is kind of rich with this history around integration efforts and around thinking about, how to include all members of the community in an equitable way. And the school has struggled with that. And so the French dual language program and the IB program began to attract some white families and more affluent families in the neighborhood and in the area and within the district. And that came with some challenges. It came with some benefits. It came with the benefit of integration, which is something that, we wanted to happen. It came with, the politics around power and privilege and how you talk about race in an integrated school. It came with white entitlement and how you navigate, who's showing up to the table and demanding certain things, and how to ensure that all families feel included and safe and a part of the community. So the work has been, there's a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of complexities, and there's no formula, right? If there was a formula for how we did this work, we wouldn't, be here having these conversations. So it's messy and it's uncomfortable. One of the things we did before the District 15 diversity plan was implemented, we opted into the DOE's diversity pilot program. So we were able to secure 45% of our seats for students who qualify for free and/or reduced lunch. And so that sort of helped us kind of tame the school being up and coming middle school, high school, and becoming more of a viable option for families, for white families specifically. It allowed us to maintain our numbers in terms of diversity. And so that was a real, I think, benefit for us. And now that we're a District 15 school with this middle school lottery, right, we all now reap the benefits of ensuring that students across the district and have access to all of the middle schools. But in some ways, we got a little bit of a head start because we opted into that program because it was a value and it was something that was really important to us. And so what's happened since then? We've really focused on restorative justice. We focused on, moving certain practices into a more equity, inclusive, anti-racist model. So for example, for years, we had a save room, right? Like many schools, where if a student, acts out in class, they're sent to the save room, they meet with the dean, maybe there's some consequence, if it's major, maybe there's a suspension, parents are called, et cetera. And that's the way things sort of functioned in our school for so many years. And so instead, we created a restorative justice center, and I hired a restorative justice coordinator. And we built a team around equity and around restorative justice. And that team has really helped develop programs and advisory curriculum, which I'm going to show you some examples of, really looking at our discipline practices. And this is something we did with the district, where we looked at data, we looked at our suspension rates, we looked at which students were being referred to special education, which students were being suspended and why, and then engaging in inquiry work around dismantling some of the biases and the disproportionality, and really investing in professional development and building an equity team that worked hand in hand with restorative justice. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as well. And one of the things that I always come back to, that Anita has said to the principals multiple times, is to take off the rose-colored glasses. And sometimes when someone says something so simple, right, it just resonates with you, and you can kind of put it in your pocket and just kind of keep it with you in many different complex situations, right? And so I've really held on to that as sort of something a tool that I would come back to as a principal, and it's really helped move the work. What are we seeing, right? Like, it doesn't have to be more complicated than that, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a leader. What are the inequities that you are seeing, that you're hearing about, that you're experiencing, and what do you want to change? Let's be honest about it, Let's practice being brave and bold, and let's dive and lean into that work. And so for us, you know, kind of taking that, like, let's take off these rose-colored glasses, though the school is growing and there's some successes, right? And our enrollment numbers are, you know, quadrupling, right? That's all great on paper, but let's take off the rose-colored glasses. Who's learning, who's not learning, right? Who's getting suspended, who's not getting suspended, and why? What's being taught? How is it being taught across grades 6 to 12, right? Which parents are showing up to PTA and SLT? Which parents aren't? Why? So a lot of our work has really been centered and grounded in inquiry and in equity, but in inquiry, knowing that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. There's no manual, there's no handbook, there's no quick fix, there's no magic wand, right? All we have, right, in any school community, I believe, is a group of committed educators who believe that students, right, and teachers and families should be welcomed in communities and learning environments that are inclusive, that are anti-racist, right, that allow students to thrive and be seen and be heard, and be successful and not only make academic gains, right? We know the research, if students don't feel safe emotionally, socially, if they don't feel psychologically safe, chances of them learning and academically, those chances are very low if they don't feel safe enough to take risks, to make mistakes, to seek guidance, to collaborate with a peer. And we want our classrooms to be student-centered. We want them to be rich with collaboration and inquiry, but how do we get students to do that if they're in fear, or if they don't feel welcomed, or if they don't feel valued, or they don't see themselves in the curriculum, or they're seeing and observing, because students, kids see everything, right? They're noticing all the things that we may have had. Seeing who's getting on the honor roll. They're seeing who's getting the perfect attendance award. They're seeing who's going to the save room, right? And what is that information communicating to them about themselves and about one another? And so that's been my number one charge as a leader, is just to continuously bring us back to what is actually happening and what we can do to change it, and to just be real about that. And lots of bumps, lots of hiccups along the way, right? Nothing's perfect. But I've had to commit to some action around that, because we can talk about these things and have these lofty ideas and values, right? But what do we actually do? And so some of the things we've done is, and because we're in middle school and high school, it sort of makes sense. We need to get students more involved. Like, why are we making so many decisions? This is a big question I've always had, even as a teacher. We make so many decisions about students' lives, but we don't often bring them to the table to inform those decisions or to collaborate around those decisions. And so that's been a big part of the last couple of years, is developing an active student government, and a student equity team, sitting down with students and looking at policy, looking at our grading policy, looking at our restorative justice discipline policy, looking at, things like who decides on which trips we go to every year. Can students help inform some of those decisions, right? So thinking about, wherever possible, how to integrate student voice in leadership and decision-making has really shifted the culture of our school. Because I don't know if you've noticed, kids, young people, right, developmentally, it's appropriate for them to want to feel some agency, right? They want to feel independent, they want to feel heard and empowered. And we all come from, I think, socially, culturally, on some level, this idea, this power over, like, I'm the adult, I'm the teacher, I'm here to, right, deliver the content, you internalize it, hopefully, or I'm the principal, I make the rules. And so we had to dismantle some of that. And for some teachers and some community members, that was very easy and it made sense. And it was aligned to their social justice values. And for some folks, it's really uncomfortable and it's against everything they believe. And so, I'm not here to say any of this is perfect or doesn't go without conflict or tough conversations, or even helping people move out to different, maybe this isn't the right school for you. Like, what do those conversations look like? So it's an uphill battle, and it's a hill worth climbing. Some of the other things we've done, our equity team has really focused on professional development. And so the last couple of years, though we've had an equity team for years, we didn't really have the capacity or the skills to lead high quality professional development in terms of affinity groups, in terms of conversations around race, in terms of looking at curriculum through a culturally relevant lens and an equity lens. And so the equity team members are really, they've really become coaches and consultants, where they'll sit down with a group of teachers and engage in a protocol to look at their units and their lesson plans using a set of questions, or they'll lead a professional development around trauma-informed practices. And so they're really, it's a group of teachers. I think we have about 15 members right now. And there's teachers, there's paraprofessionals, there's guidance counselors, et cetera. And one thing we did differently this year is we really wanted and some of you may have listened to the Nice White Parents podcast. After the podcast, we had conversations with, again, going back to Anita's take off the rose-colored glasses, like, what's happening? Wow, people are talking about the history of your school. People are talking about the PTA. Okay, I can, ignore and deny that that's happening, right? Or I can lean into it and say, this is something that we need to look into a little more deeply. It's not that this is a surprise to us, but it's a dialogue that's happening all over the country. So let's leverage this moment. Let's have an honest conversation about it. And I have to say, the current PTA at that time throughout the summer, 2 white women, immigrant women, passionate parents, amazing human beings, they said, maybe it makes sense for us to step down and make room for parents of color in this moment. And we had this really hard conversation, and they did it. And right now our PTA, as of September 2020, is completely parents of color. And wow, that's huge. Right? I mean, that's completely huge. And representation isn't everything, but it's a lot, right? And there's still work to do. And so that's been a lot of our work, is really, just engaging the community as much as possible and taking and implementing that learner stance, that inquiry stance. And I think the more that we do that, the more people trust the school is a safe place. People see that our actions, right? We can say all the things, but our actions are proving, right? And are demonstrating what we really believe. And that's, those are some examples. Students are also leading town halls, grade level town halls, coming to SLT, PTA, and just any opportunity, again, where students can be at the forefront and engage in these conversations, I think is super important. And even at the elementary school level, I've seen amazing work happen in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade classes where students are helping to inform school-wide events, school-wide policies, and, using a critical equity lens. So I think a lot of this work can happen in elementary schools as well. I'm going to share my screen and just show you, hopefully I can do that. Do you see my screen? Yes, okay. Let's see. So this is in September, and I'm going to share this document. In September, we basically sent out a call to action. The administration and PTA, we went through our equity commitments. And again, I think it's really important, as a district, we do this, as schools, we do this, to re-communicate our values, re-communicate our commitments around equity, around inclusion, around anti-racism. People need to continue to hear that these things are a priority. And then, of course, backing up those things with action so that it feels real and it feels meaningful. This was some of the work that kind of came out of the Nice White Parents community dialogue sessions that we had. The equity team, we came up with their 2 major equity commitments, the questions that are really guiding our work this year. And again, I'm gonna drop this document in the chat so you can look at it. These are our equity priorities and actions for the year. And we, continue to update the whole community by providing like a quarterly sort of newsletter. This is where we are. This is the progress we made. These are some of the challenges. In the beginning of the year, we highlighted some of the work that the PTA has done. And we put out a big call for parents to join the parent equity team. And right now we have about 15 families participating, meeting once a month. And I included in this document the resources that have been used for that as well. This is something we're putting together for the November, December, sort of a reflection on how things are going. So like I said before, we have an equity team that's basically faculty members. We have a student equity team that's across grades 6 to 12, approximately 20 students. And then we have the family equity team. So if you kind of think about equity as this big umbrella, and then these 3 different committees working side by side, we have opportunities when they come together. But obviously that's a lot of people. And so we really wanted to break it into 3 different groups with specific kind of focus areas and goals for the year. In addition to that, we have this year focused a lot on, because of remote learning, because of the pandemic, because of everything happening in the world, and the DOE and district-wide initiative around trauma-informed practices. The equity team really led a lot of that work, in addition to just equity PD around, let's look at your curriculum, let's look at potential blind spots and how you're teaching, what you're teaching. We're always going back to, like, let's talk about bias, because it exists. We all bring it to the table. And I don't believe that one, anti-bias workshop is enough. We're never done. So I think it's always important to integrate that work with teachers, especially as they're leading like learning environments in classrooms with kids. These are some of the resources that we've used as a community to engage conversation, reflection in grade teams, subject teams, full faculty, and the equity teams. So I'm going to share those links with all of you. And again, having a clear set of values. These were the values that the equity team developed a couple of years ago, and we come back to them and thinking about how we create inclusive communities in the classroom, how we collaborate, how we communicate, and just kind of taking an honest look constantly at what we're doing, where we're succeeding, where we're falling short. I think that's helped move the work for us. And then this is just an example of a curriculum protocol that our equity team developed in terms of looking at bias within the curriculum. We found that there was a lot of kind of deficit mindset and planning around what kids could do and what kids couldn't do, which resulted in what some may call low expectations or a lack of rigor. And it really had to do with it had to do with bias, and it had to do with being afraid of letting students fail because of beliefs around what they could and couldn't do. So those are hard conversations to have, but important ones. And again, so the idea in this is that a teacher chooses one of these questions and goes through an inquiry process with an equity team member to revise, modify their curriculum. And we've seen some really great changes because it's been individualized, there's teacher choice, and it's non-evaluative, it's with a colleague. And so there can be opportunities for honest reflection. And then lastly, this is something that we kind of adopted from Arts and Letters, another school where we engaged in classroom observations, looking through an anti-racist lens. And this has been shared a couple of times before. This is really powerful for our school community, for teachers to receive feedback, and they volunteered to participate in this around student agency in the classroom, how students were interacting across lines of race, how adult tone in the classroom, looking at that, because there's so many subtleties to this, right? Sometimes it's really just about a facial expression, or maybe how a student felt in a moment not being called on. So really having these conversations to just do the inquiry work. Again, no quick fix. And so I included that protocol. And then the last thing I'm going to share is our students and our restorative justice team created a revamped advisory curriculum for this remote world that we're living in. And it was really important, for so many of us, so many schools, we always talk about advisory. We believe advisory is important. And in some advisory classes, it's done well. Some advisors, it's not done well. It's more of like, let's play Uno, right? We don't want kids playing Uno in advisory. maybe once at the end of the year when there's a celebration and everybody's bringing in a dish, right? But as a school leader, right, that's not my dream for advisory, that kids are sitting around playing Uno. So how do you create a culture of advisory where teachers are bought in, students are bought in? Again, we're in middle school and a high school. Let's bring students to the table. So students helped us develop this. They trained teachers. It's not implemented perfectly. There's been a lot of changes this year. So I think that contributed to, the success of this completely. But the idea is that, every month there's a theme. There are some key lessons. We're an IB school, so every month there's a specific IB learner trait that we practice and kind of uphold, and students get awards. So like one month it might maybe about responsibility, one month it may be about being an inquirer or being reflective or being principled. And so the students thought that integrating the IB traits was a good idea, which makes a lot of sense. And then they came up with lessons, and all of these lessons about with virtual, there's a lot of links to, different videos, et cetera. And it always starts with a guiding question, with some kind of activity, a dialogue. And so this was also another way, and is still another way where we're really building community for students in advisory classes, which they have twice a week, across lines of race, across lines of, all of the similarities and all the differences, and trying to build and develop amazing, kind human beings, right? That's the ultimate goal. And I haven't been paying attention to the time, but I think that's probably about 15 minutes. Hopefully that's not much longer. Sorry, Camille.
Nicole, thank you so much. This has just been an incredible presentation, and just speaks to what a wonderful administrator you are and leader in this district.
I don't know about that, but one day at a time.
I'm sorry. and modest, and very modest. I guess what I was hearing is that there's so many layers of complexity to this work, and no real formula. You have offered us so many ideas and opportunities to take away, and models that could be used for best practices and things that others can try at their own schools. And I thank you so much for that. I just want to reiterate, you were saying this is like messy and uncomfortable work. And creating like a welcoming, inclusive, anti-racist environment is so important. It just is what this world needs now and always needed. And that it's really just like the work of every day of our lives. And keep trying, don't give up. If something didn't work, try something else. And thank you so much for all of the work and love of the students that you're offering and bringing everybody to the table, and, just including all voices. And I do believe that this is the way that we're all going to move forward together in a happier world, happier society, happier children. So thank you again for your time, and you're so appreciated. Thank you. So our next speaker is Maddie Fox. She's an assistant professor of children and youth services. Children and youth studies and sociology at the City University of New York. Maddie and her team have spent the last 6 months working with CEC 15, Superintendent Scott, and the Office of District Planning, gathering perspectives, experiences, dreams, and desires from across the community in an effort to help elevate the voices of people in our district who are often left out of educational decision-making. We want to include all voices in an attempt to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion in our elementary schools. Maddie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Camille. Thanks for inviting me. That was so wonderful to get to hear Professor Lanzalato about all the work and I think that you're doing, and can't wait till my kids get to be in middle school. So I'm going to talk, Camille asked me to talk a little bit about participatory action research. And of course, we're very engaged right now with District 15 and thinking about equity issues, educational equity issues in District 15 through participatory action research, as Camille was just talking about, through the thinking around the rezoning, the upcoming rezoning or potential rezoning of Subdistrict 3 of District 15 for the elementary schools. But there's a lot of overlap with what Nicole was just talking about, you know, a lot, and really participatory action research, where she was talking about inquiry as an approach to interrogate, or we think about inquiry a lot. That is really what it is, and really kind of an approach to interrogate and transform how power operates. And that it's kind of what I heard and what you're talking about is that it's like this active stance. It's not like a decision that you get done or an awakening you have. It's just an ongoing, it's a framework, an approach for an ongoing way of working. And that has a lot of overlap with what participatory action research is. So as Camille said, I'm a professor of sociology and children and youth studies at Brooklyn College. And I'm part of a research collective based at the CUNY Graduate Center called the Public Science Project. And I'm a parent in District 15 of elementary age young people. And in my work, I actually think most of my participatory action research work has been with young people. So I think a lot about young people. My work is around thinking about the systems and structures that intersect with young people's experiences. So that can often be schooling, but it also is a framework that opens up so that it's young people's lives are very impacted by schools and schooling and by some other kind of institutions and structures as well. And so we think about, in this project, for instance, we're thinking about schools and the communities that we're part of as well, and their families too. So I'm going to talk for a little, and we only have a few minutes, so I'm going to be real quick, but I'm going to talk for a few minutes about just some of the core commitments of a participatory action research approach, and then just really highlight one piece from the recent work we've been doing around District 15 to kind of think with you really about the participatory action research approach in thinking about issues of educational equity. So first though, we're a small group. If you are willing to put your connection to District 15 in the chat, just so I have a sense of who's in the space, that would be great. So just, if we can kind of introduce ourselves just for a brief, your name and your connection to District 15 would be great in the chat. And then I'm going to ask you a question. So thank you for doing that. Hello, welcome. So when you think of research, without thinking about it too hard, what comes to mind? Hi, Kelly. So what comes to mind? Think of research quick, without even thinking about it. What comes to mind? You're thinking too hard, I can tell.
Curiosity.
Oh, good, you're saying it. That's even better. Throw it out. Curiosity.
Sorry.
No, that's good. That's great. You can say it out loud. Or good, scientist. Yeah, so if you think about a researcher, what comes to mind? Camille thought of scientists, writing long nights. If you think of a researcher, who comes to mind? Curiosity, that's great. We'll read out this one. Grad students coming, asking a lot of questions, disappearing, and then speaking on a panel. Word. Lots of reading, great, okay. Finding a solution. Data for a paper, okay. Disclosure, interest in problem solving, these are great. So the participatory action research is rooted in notions of democracy and social justice, draws on critical theory, and it's an approach. It's like an epistemology. It's a way of thinking about approaching knowledge production. Has multiple geneses, people kind of draw from multiple roots, including Orlando Falls Borda in South America, Rahman in South Asia. There are some Freirean roots and thinking about like a pedagogy of the oppressed approach. And then Kurt Lewin here, who worked here in New York City in the 30s and 40s, and also pulling from various critical theorists and the work of W.B. Du Bois in order to really think about how we can understand the ways that knowledge production is power, right? That we are accessing power. We're to produce knowledge is a way of activating or producing power. Participatory action research democratizes the knowledge production process. So, and in that process, it makes findings more robust, but also builds solidarities, community, and reveals the ways that we're all interdependent in the process. And that really kind of builds with kind of what Nicole was talking about, what happens inside her school, that through the inclusion of young people, through the inclusion, asking all these questions, then you can kind of dig into very difficult questions that probably don't have easy answers, but need ongoing work. We have some core assumptions that inform the work and, that begin with, we do research with, not for or on. And my colleague, Maria Elena Torre, she talks about creating participatory contact zones. In the District 15 project, and in District 15 in general, a lot right now, we're trying to think around these very entrenched issues around how racism operates, how segregation is upheld and perpetuated. And these are issues that have been part of how our whole society is structured. They're in the very architecture of our society, right? And so when we're thinking about how to open up an inquiry, how to ask a question, how to think about what kinds of responses we might want to generate in response to a question, it begins with who's at the table. And I also heard Nicole talking about that as well, like who is even sitting around the table. And so we are, one of the ways we can do this is in participatory action research projects. My colleague Maria Elena Torre talks about creating participatory context zones that are really deliberately very diverse groups of people, very differently positioned, coming together to make a commitment together around an area of inquiry. And that's really what we did in District 15. We recruited a group of parents from across the 7 impacted elementary schools that are part of an upcoming rezoning. And we joined together in a group and started to build together towards interrogating this area of inquiry. And we constantly work in participatory action research projects to surface the ways our lives, our experiences, our opportunities are interconnected and uneven, sometimes often uneven. So another core commitment is that we recognize that and have a core assumption that knowledge is broadly distributed. There are all kinds of forms of knowledge that are not necessarily all equally valued in our society, but that we come to the table really honoring all forms of knowledge and understanding that we each bring different forms of knowledge to the work, and that forms of knowledge that have been historically delegitimized are held up and valued just as more traditional forms of knowledge, like a research you might find in a book would be valued. We spend a great deal of time sharing knowledge. In this case, we're a group of adult community members connected to elementary age young people, but it can also be like a group of young people, or also often my work is involved with multi-generational groups of young people. We spend a lot of time, because of sharing and valuing different forms of knowledge, we spend a lot of time sharing knowledge from our lived experience, building a group, building relationships, creating ongoing opportunities for exchange of expertise. And in part, this is about making space for different parts of knowledge, and in part about creating a new way of being together. When I'm working with young people or with a multi-generational group, in the beginning, even with a community group of adults, in the beginning, there's often assumption that I am kind of a researcher who holds expertise and knowledge that I will be, delivering, or I'm a teacher, adult person who's going to be, running things. And I think a lot of the work in the beginning, and if we're really going to be able to interrogate some of these entrenched social justice issues that are very, very difficult to come up with ways through, then we have to recreate radical spaces of that are really kind of more are deeply democratic. And so that takes a lot of slow time and building relationships. Another core commitment is that we conduct research with those who are impacted by a question, a problem, an issue. And so again, that's that thinking really carefully about who's at the table, who's not at the table, where are the silences, what are the forgotten alternatives? And we work collectively through methods and analysis and findings. We decide together what products will be meaningful for all the communities impacted. The District 15 PAR team met this morning, and that was one of the questions we were really thinking through. What product, how to disseminate, right? Like, how do we want to engage? It can't just be one presentation. It cannot be a report that sits on a shelf. There needs to be multiple products that make sense in a local context. But even, and very importantly, the work of conducting research with those most impacted begins at the moment of deciding what questions to ask, or even what the research question is. In the District 15 PAR project that we're doing right now, our research question is, what does educational equity mean to our community, and how does rezoning fit in? But it took us a minute to clarify that question. And we wouldn't have come to that question if we hadn't had a very diverse group of parents and family, community members, caregivers on our research team that represented communities from across the subzone, including we're very, very well represented on our team with public housing community members. A fourth commitment is that we think really carefully about units of analysis. So we really think critically about shifting blame instead of on individuals, but thinking about how systems, structures, and policies play a role in producing whatever conditions we might be noticing. And so when we're thinking about how inequity shows up in our subzone, if we're thinking about how our schools might be segregated, we're thinking about history. We're thinking about histories of segregation. We're thinking about housing policy. We're thinking about urban design and Robert Moses. We're interrogating the structures that have produced the conditions that we're observing, and then thinking about, okay, then what, now what? And we're always pushing ourselves to think about power and to notice and interrogate patterns. And so part of that is that we're also really rethinking what might sort of seem normal, or what we've come to think of as normal. So sometimes this means we pay special attention to like a story that might come up just once, that someone tells quietly in a side conversation, but that we know is a really important story. And that when we pay attention to it, we notice that it is a counter story and helps us reframe or understand in a new way a kind of normalized narrative around what's a good school or whatever it might be that we're thinking about. Though PAR projects often get kind of characterized as qualitative, they really actually most often pull from multiple methods in order to be able to think across scale. So be able to look at the big picture and think about that, but also really pay attention to the individual whole person or a lived experience or a story. And then a fifth core commitment is that rather than focusing on damage, we lean towards desire. So it's and imagination, and we pull on the work of Robin D.G. Kelly and Maxine Green and others to think about kind of the subjunctive, like what could be, what should be, rather than and kind of radical dreaming in that way, rather than focusing on kind of ways oppression has damaged or caused pain and hurt and trauma. Although those can be important pieces, but it's where our focus fits. And finally, and we're committed to building kind of really deep relationships and research through those relationships. And we find that we dive in, it's particularly productive to dive into disagreements as opportunities to theorize dynamics of power and create multiple ways of kind of understanding of an issue. And so we brought all those commitments, and we're at 2 now, all those commitments to the District 15 PAR project work. And, you know, a couple weeks ago, we presented our initial findings and recommendations. What do you think, Camille?
Yeah, I mean, if you have the time, I would appreciate that you continue.
I can probably like bring it home in like three minutes. We'll see if I can.
Okay. Yeah, you got off to a late start. So whatever you're able to do, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So, you know, yeah, so let's see, I think I'll talk for a sec. So we're asking these questions, you know, this rezoning came up in District 15, and this PAR project was launched. And we're still, you know, it's right at the end. We haven't quite had a chance yet we'll have more of a chance to reflect on the process. But through the process, we built a team that is kind of a participatory contact zone, a very diverse team from across the sub-district. And through the process, we also been building a relationship between this community team of community members who are accountable, whose explicit accountability is to notions of equity and accountability to BIPOC communities in the sub-district, accountability to thinking about how does integration in terms of like the 5 R's fit into a commitment to equity, and in all of that in relation to the rezoning. But then through the process, and one thing I think that has been unusual in this project has been there's also been this ongoing relationships being built between this community group and the CEC and the DOE, really. So it has been an interesting way of rethinking kind of the human relationships that make up kind of some of these institutions and some of the bureaucratic kind of processes that help that are at play in this work. That's something I think we'll want to think more about. But when we do this work, and I think it was also Nicole spoke about this in her presentation as well, when you begin with inquiry, when you sit in inquiry, when you ask questions you don't know the answers to, and when you're thinking about making sure people are coming together around that inquiry who are impacted and maybe differently situated, differently positioned around that inquiry, then we're not going to come up with what we're going to generate is going to be complex. There isn't going to be a kind of easy kind of pat answer. We're not going to be able to go in from the beginning and know kind of like what the activist response is at the end. When we bring all these complex pieces together, then we're going to have findings that are complex and recommendations as well. So I'm going to share my screen just to share our second finding. Can y'all see my screen? On our second finding, and I can put, if someone hasn't, I can put our very simple website on in the chat, and the Zoom link to the CEC recording is there. We're in the process of making some other more kind of user-friendly dissemination tools as well. But I just wanted to highlight this finding. So we heard, our second finding was this desire for equity-based integration that we heard from across families in the subzone. So in our project, we surveyed over 800 families connected to the 7 impacted schools, and those surveys were well distributed across. There's about 20% of each school community, 20% of the current enrollment from each school community. And then we also conducted more than 75 in-depth community conversations, is what we call them. We are out at community events, even through the pandemic, and really did a lot of participation in community through the process as well. And what we heard across was a really strong desire for, I guess I should put this in presentation mode, for racially diverse schools. So there was really strong, and this was consistent across race, ethnicity, across neighborhood. People wanted schools. They talked about wanting schools that are racially diverse. But we also heard a desire for public school as free, quality, and accessible to all everywhere. So there was also, while people wanted diverse schools, they also really wanted for schools not to be exclusive. And at the same time, we also heard another important and strong finding was that families that in Gowanus, Wyckoff, and Warren houses and families in Red Hook reported attending schools in their local communities and wanting to attend schools in their local communities and maintaining access to those schools that have historically been their community's schools. And we did not hear a desire from BIPOC community members from Red Hook or Gowanus, like a strong desire to attend PS 58 and PS 29, for instance. But everybody wanted all schools to be accessible to all. And another theme that emerged was that BIPOC community members and some white community members expressed how important it was for them that their children attend schools in and with community schools reflective of surrounding communities. So we heard a desire for a transformation toward equity-based integration, which leaves room for community schools that are majority children of color, living in community together and attending a thriving and popular school. And so this particular finding, I'm going to stop share so I can stop talking, is one of the places where our work kind of sat in some of those complexities, where it wasn't just simply like, let's ship everyone around and integrate the schools by, in terms of moving bodies. It was really a call for thinking more deeply and in more difficult ways about equity. And so, this is, I think, a way to engage community and build kind of community ownership of educational decision-making and a pathway, for forging new ways for community to be in relationship with the city and with the Department of Education, and in ways that don't, that kind of disrupt the ways power can kind of normally operate. So thank you.
So much, Maddie. Really appreciate your time and all of the great work that you're doing. That is one huge question of what does educational equity mean to our community? And I think it's something that we all really need to think deeply about and recognize that this is a question that should have been at the forefront of many conversations for basically generations. So thank you for doing all of this amazing work and sharing your gifts and talents with District 15 and hopefully creating some guidelines for future work in other districts around the city and nationally. So thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to thank our guest speakers, Nicole and Maddie, who really are going above and beyond in the work that they're doing to promote equity. We have incredible leaders in District 15 who make exceptional efforts to make this world a better place for all students and all people. If you'd like to be an ally in this work, there are a lot of ways to help make change, recognizing that our values influence our actions. In District 15, we value all voices, we prioritize our students, and as adults, we keep learning and lead with intention. When you don't understand something, ask questions, read and research on your own, learn as much as you can about topics you're interested in. Self-awareness helps us make more thoughtful choices. And the trauma of racism that many of our friends have experienced or that we may have experienced ourselves is a harmful force, causing pain and distrust. And you can work towards building a world that encourages all people to come together. Every day, be attentive to the choices that you're making, knowing that our own implicit biases can often lead us to make uninformed decisions that can negatively impact ourselves and others. If you've attended an implicit bias workshop, you'll recognize some of these interventions and tips on how you can make more well-informed decisions. I'm just going to drop that in the chat here. 1 minute. We had a workshop last year with Perception Institute, and I am going to share their paperwork with you if you haven't already seen it. So some of the things that they suggest is recognize when a response is based on a stereotype. and consider how this biased response could be avoided in the future to help prevent making stereotypic inferences, gather information about individuals rather than group-based attributes, to increase empathy towards the stereotyped group. And, this, like Ellen dropped in the chat, discrimination against individuals with disabilities crosses all racial and ethnic lines. I think that we all, need to really keep that at the forefront of our conversations as well. Stereotype is well beyond like a couple of different areas. Seek opportunities to encounter and engage in positive interactions with others. This could be as simple as sharing a good morning greeting. And do share what you learn, because in leadership training, there's a motto, each one, teach one. So if you are a parent leader, or even if you're not, if you have some things that you think are worthy of teaching others, please do that. Kindly remind your friends, family, and others that you know that their choices also have strength to move the needle in one direction or another. If you'd like to find out about your own implicit associations about race, gender, and other topics, you can check out implicit.harvard.edu. Let me drop that link also in the chat. 1 minute. So this is an intriguing self-assessment tool, easy to use, and it'll really make you think deeply. I did it a few times myself, and I was really blown away and still sort of like second guessing my answers. So a lot of things that you'll be able to find out about yourself and how you think. And it's available in 13 languages, so please share that with friends. You could also, if you have time, to read a very interesting research report entitled The Science of Equality in Education. This shows the academic benefits to diverse learning environments. And other things that you can do, similar to what Nicole had talked about, is join your school's diversity committee. And if they don't have one, work with your PTA or principal to form one. Path to equity is long and winding. You're going to hit some bumps along the way, tripping and falling. Do not give up. Don't be deterred. You're on the right road. We're walking it together. I want to thank our audience for logging on today. Everybody from Superintendent Scott's office, always here supporting. You are so appreciated. And thank you everybody for taking the time. Don't forget that all of these sessions can be found on the cecd15.org website. So please do share the information with your school communities. I know that 1 p.m. on a Monday is a hard time for people to come on, but we are trying to push these videos out into the public, so please do share them. And thank you for your continued support and advocacy for all of our children. Don't forget to save the date for our next and last session, Monday, December 14th. Our topic is going to be on giving versus gaining, school lotteries and their impact on education. So that's going to be pretty exciting. Have a wonderful day. Take care and stay safe, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.